Welcome to This Is. I'm not sure what we're doing here today.
But I am, my friend. So the other day I was strolling through the aisles of Target when I spotted a suspicious-looking Xbox Series S. If you will recall, Matt and I did a video at the Xbox Showcase a few months ago when Xbox team announced the new Xbox Series X. Sort of low-key, they also mentioned that they were going to bring out a white 1TB Series S. That might not sound exciting because no one paid attention to it.
Also, no one paid attention that they discontinued the black one.
Exactly, yeah. So last year they brought out a 1TB Series S in black. Got rid of that at Xbox Showcase, and now all of Series S's are white. So, you can imagine my surprise as I see a innocuous-looking white 1TB Xbox Series S sitting on that Target shelf. Matt, I present to you my findings, exclusively on the This Is channel, the home of nothing but the most technical findings on YouTube. The new Xbox Series S is worse.
What?
Yeah, buddy. This is the original Xbox Series S motherboard. So if you want to take a look at that, you can see that it is the same way it's been since 2020. And this is the motherboard from the 2024 Xbox Series S. Right off the bat, what do you see as the difference between the two of these?
This big,
Yeah, technical terms, please.
block.
The big block. They have redesigned the motherboard first and foremost. So not only have they chosen a more striking shade of green, they've simplified it a lot. So if you look near the South Bridge, which fun fact, it still says Xbox One on the new one.
Yeah, the chips actually say Xbox One.
Yeah, they've kept that chip around since the Xbox One. The board itself has been very much simplified. Fewer sort of capacitors, traces, it's simpler. They just trimmed it down, probably because when they designed the Series S, they overbuilt a little bit because they weren't quite sure exactly where it was going to land. Once the Series S came out, they knew exactly what kind of power restraints. They knew that they could take off a couple chips here, a couple traces there, and it would be fine, right? This makes sense. Now, what you will not see is an upgraded chip. Part of the reason I know that is because we took the calipers to it with like a 1/10 of a millimeter difference. That could be literally just like the actual size of the IHS that they put over the top of it. Power numbers are the same, 26 watts at idle at both. We did the exact same Forza test that we did with the Xbox Series X. It was 75 on the old one, 77 on the new one. Total margin of error stuff. Baseline, looking at the boards, they have simplified things, but kept the exact same chip. This seems fine so far, right? Let me present to you evidence exhibit B. This is the original cooler from the launch Xbox Series S. Would you care to describe to everyone at home what you're looking at?
It's a heat sink. Nice big block. It's very chunky and several heat pipes.
Correct, 3. So when we went from the new to the old Series X, there was a vapor chamber in the original Series X. They got rid of that in favor of a heatsink similar to this. And because they put a smaller chip inside, or rather a shrunken chip that needed less power, they needed less cooling. A vapor chamber is nice to have, but if it's not necessary, that's fine. They saved the money. It's not a huge loss. Certainly, this is still smaller than what's on the Xbox Series X now. You've also got this big chunk of aluminum with a copper heat spreader on the top. This lots in to this little guy, which means that when it's on there, it makes a very firm connection. There's not a lot of like airflow leakage. Makes sense, right?
Yep.
Take a look at the new one.
Oh, so just noticeably lighter.
In fact, I have a scale. I can tell you exactly how much lighter. So the old one weighs 265 grams. Put the new one on there and see what it weighs. 216 grams. So they took a somewhat substantial amount of weight out of it, and this part is missing. If you took this part and weighed it as well, it would be an even bigger difference. What you're looking at here is a smaller heatsink that will have less thermal mass. Even though the noise was actually kind of similar, it's about a 2 dB difference, actually in favor of the new model. But the new Xbox Series S ran a full 5 degrees warmer on the exhaust, which you can assume that on the actual chip is probably a larger sort of difference. And it makes sense if you've got the exact same chip with a smaller heatsink. Math, my friend, physics. They don't lie. The cooler was doing a lot more work for not only the chip, but also the RAM. For the new one, they have simplified it. They flattened the entire thing down. So it's still making contact, but you're not making a solid sort of chunk of aluminum contact. You're just getting like the sort of the edges of the actual heatsink. They actually added some extra foam to like the actual fan grill to sort of drive more air out. But a 5-degree difference is not insubstantial. So basically you've got the same amount of heat being exhausted out that needs to be sort of dissipated. The console itself is running warmer. Now, mind you, that's not like an insanely hot sort of temperature, but you put a Series S in a little like TV cabinet or something where it doesn't have great airflow. We tested in like open air where the fan was actually slightly quieter, but I guarantee you put the new Series S in a confined space, you give it a couple years of dust buildup and whatnot, that fan will have to start cranking up much higher.
Okay. Yeah. This is interesting. Was there any difference to the fan?
This is super anecdotal. It's got a slightly different sound signature. Like when you put your ear up to it, it sounds slightly different and it's slightly quieter, but it is essentially the same.
Okay.
There is one actual upgrade on the new Series S. So they have redesigned almost all the components to now give you little sort of legends to tell you what screw type you're using and how many of them there are all over the place. It will say like, oh, you need 6 Torx T8s to open this or whatever the case is, which is objectively nice. The older one, you had to grab like a couple of extra bits. There's like a T7 in the middle. They've actually simplified it so you can get into the entire Series S with just 2 types of Torx, and they tell you exactly which ones to do and where each screw is. You actually don't really need the iFixit guide. You can kind of just follow what it says. Beyond that, it's pretty clear to me that this is a cheaper motherboard to make and certainly a cheaper cooler to manufacture. Now, I don't want to come out here and tell you that the new Series S is like some complete disaster or anything like that. While I do believe that it is worse, much like when the PS5 1100 came out, and that was just the same thing with a smaller heatsink, it was still fine. It's not like it's gonna run at like worse performance or it's gonna cause a lot of issues, but apples to apples, if you've got the exact same thing with less cooling capability that runs hotter out of the box, as you give it time, if you put it again in a thermally constrained environment like a sort of a TV cabinet, those small differences can become larger. So it's just something that I found was very interesting.
The old one looks very busy.
Just look at how much less is going on with the new motherboard. Like they clearly trimmed out a lot of stuff.
So then that leads me to question, could they have made a smaller one? Looking at the old one, it's like, oh man, how could they have ever slimmed this down from that, whatever.
Yeah.
But like now without all this extra text here, you're seeing all these chunks.
It's not a big enough difference. I think what Microsoft should have done, in my opinion, is actually shrunken the chip, right? If they would have given it the 6nm treatment the same way they did with the Series X, not only would none of this be a factor at all, theoretically it would have been cheaper, but I'm assuming that they did the math and it wasn't worth trying to change the actual chip.
No, because again, like I said,
part.
This to me actually makes more sense than redesigning the chip.
And to be fair, I'm sure that they slightly overbuilt the original model, and this newer model is just bringing it down to kind of like the area that's, I'm sure, very comfortable. It's one of those things where if you shrink down, cheapen, and simplify a design, but still give me the same performance or better power efficiency, whatever, that's all fine. But when you take the exact same chip, you cut costs on your end, but you don't give me any kind of benefit at all, because all you did was you take my heatsink and go snip, 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 snip. That's where I have a little bit of a concern. I will say that part of the reason why this is a thing is because the console model is different this generation. Obviously, Microsoft brought out the Series S and the Series X at the exact same time. I think what's different this time around is that in the past, PS4 launched in 2013 for $400, and 3 years later, they cut it to $300 and brought a slim model. That's the way it always goes, you know? A few years later, they make a slim model, it's a little cheaper. That's not happening anymore. You know, the PlayStation has been going up in price, and that's largely because the actual chip itself, this SoC, which is where all the fun stuff happens, this is no longer able to be made smaller and cheaper and easier as time goes on. Price was no issue. Microsoft could have made it smaller.
Yep.
They could have made it more efficient, but it would have been more expensive. And I don't think anyone is going to pay an extra $100 for a slim model that saves 20 watts and it's a little bit smaller, right? Like that's just not something that most people are going to do.
It's interesting that like literally the capacitors are smaller. Literally, the components themselves is a smaller component on the board.
You know, normally you think a slim model, oh, this is gonna be the one that like modders are gonna use. This is not really better. I mean, technically, if you're gonna like, I don't know, do some crazy stuff maybe, but like this is not necessarily better in any way that I can tell. First of all, if you are interested in buying an Xbox Series S, I don't want you to think that this new version is so bad you shouldn't buy it. Like honestly, it's not that big of a difference. But what I will tell you is that there's a way to tell the difference. Both the Series X and the Series S have a new box, which is the reason why I spotted it in Target. My strong suspicion, having looked at the new Series S and the new Series X's, all of the consoles in these new boxes are likely the updated models. Of course, if you see a white 1 terabyte Series S, 100% is gonna be this.
It's gonna be the new one.
But my strong suspicion is all new Series S's and Series X's going forward are gonna have the updated motherboards and coolers and stuff. Once the existing consoles are sort of sold out, as they sort of replenish the stock, it's all gonna be these new boards. What'd you find? Oh yeah, the SSDs are different.
I didn't realize that it was removable.
Yes, so you can remove the SSD on a Series S or Series X. It's not meant to be done because you got to tear the entire thing apart. I will say, if you're ever interested, not that I recommend you to tear Xboxes apart, the Series S is pretty easy to get into, especially now that it tells you and they've simplified the screws. You can just swap the SSD. This is it right here. My understanding is that these drives are firmware and or software locked to Xbox.
Okay.
I'm sure that they're encrypted with a key on the thing. You're not meant to ever touch or upgrade that SSD.
What if we put Windows on that one?
It's not gonna boot, I'll tell you.
I don't tear things open too often, so this is fascinating.
No, it's fun. It's fun because again, I cracked this open because I did not think that there was going to be a difference. I'm surprised they didn't make this 6nm because this is what they sell.
Yeah,
Microsoft sell way more S's.
That's kind
than
of what I
X.
was saying in the Series X. Like, why spend the time and effort on the X when the S is what actually sells units?
I agree. It's a little bit of a weird choice. I mean, to be fair, the 6nm chip, I don't know if it's actually that much cheaper. Yeah. Even though shrinking it is relatively easy, it still costs money.
You know, obviously the manufacturing, but then the shipping costs.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that adds up more on a smaller package like this. Partly with this too is they get these, like, using less copper like that, they get the sustainability credits from like tax purposes.
Probably, yeah.
This makes a lot more sense to me than the Series X. But yeah, I agree. It's weird that they didn't go with the new chip.
My strong expectation is that Microsoft lose a not insignificant amount of money for every Series S they sell. This is obviously a $350 console because it's got the 1 terabyte SSD. Microsoft does not make money on consoles. I don't blame them for trying to save 10, 15, 20 bucks here or there. It's exactly what Sony does with the PlayStation. But I do have an issue. I get a little grumpy when I see a console not improving year over year, generation over generation, but taking a backward step. I don't blame Microsoft for trying to not lose giant piles of money on every console. That's totally fair, but I do think it's worth mentioning very clearly. If there is a downgrade in a product, that's worth knowing. It might not change your decision on buying it, but if I go to a Target and I see 2 Xbox Series S's on the shelf that are exactly the same, except one has a smaller heatsink that runs hotter and one does not, I don't know which one I'm picking.
Would you prefer, and I'm asking you, the audience, a slim model of something like this, where it's basically this and the fan, and then the power supply external?
Remember the Xbox 360 and the Xbox One had the giant chunky power supplies? Nah, man.
I just I miss something like the PS2 Slim.
That thing ran at like 20 watts though. This thing's pushing like 80.
It's way easier to hide that brick in the back of a TV. Now, if I was putting it on my computer desk, it'd be a different story. I'm just curious on that. I think this is a cute little guy. How many USBs do you use on a console like this?
Wait. Stop taking away my ports, Matt.
Well, but with my Series X, I think I've only ever plugged one USB thing in at any given time. That's what I'm curious. Like, how many people do that? Because you can't.
Don't take away my ports.
I'm not saying take away.
Don't take away my ports. The new Xbox Series S downgrade. I think it's really worth saying that very clearly. Is it a big downgrade? Absolutely not. When PS5 got a huge reduction to the heatsink and was just straight up a downgrade, in my opinion. This is less severe because it's not as big of a difference, but still it's the same thing, right? If you're going out and buying a console, you should know what you're getting. And if there's 2 models that are theoretically the exact same on the outside, but one which just runs way warmer, that's at least something that you should know, right? Am I gonna pay, I don't know, $10 more for the Nolan? Maybe, but like, no one pays attention to this stuff. You don't need to pay attention to this stuff. But if it's me, I'm gonna look for which version of the Series S that I'm trying to find.
The thing you maybe should start paying attention to with these, not so much for right now, but in 6 months or something like that. It makes a bigger difference now if like, oh, prices went up on these another $50 because we can't make money on them. I don't know if I would want to spend an extra $50. I would try and find a used old one.
I actually still really like the Series S. This is still, for $300, a great console, no doubt. But I think it's just important. You wouldn't know this from the outside. I think it's valuable information for you.
It's not like this new one's now being downgraded to like
same game, same frame rates, just warmer.
Let us know what you think about this. Like, follow, subscribe. Let's get you the next one when we're gaming on our.
The Switch 2 is worse.
Yeah, it's going to be. It's going to be.
No, it won't. It's gonna be amazing. I can't wait.